Welcome to the One and O podcast hosted by Joe Cook and Brad Kellner. We're part of the Everyone Gets a Trophy podcast channel. And today, it's been since January 19th since we last talked. We've had a couple basketball games and several additions to Steve Sarkisian's Longhorn Football program. So we'll go into details with all those. Be sure to rate, subscribe, and review on Spotify and on Apple. Give our podcast a listen. Give the Everyone Gets a Trophy podcast with Kevin Dunn and Paul Wadlington a listen. And also be sure to check out our sponsors.
Audio-visual consultations. Give them a call, 512-255-8678 to get the home TV setup of your dreams. The NCAA tournament, a little more than a month away. Make sure you've got the TV setup that you want in the comfort of your home. You can make that happen with audio-visual consultations. And the One and O podcast is also brought to you by Altstadt Brewery. Altstadt beer, it is German beer made here, brewed locally in Fredericksburg, Texas, but available wherever you shop for beer all throughout the state of Texas. The best beer that you can find. It is Altstadt beer, no impurities, no regrets.
All right. So, Brad, since we last talked, we've had two transfer additions and then one large addition to Texas high school class as far as football goes. So, let's start with the transfers real quick. First, we've got Arlington Lamar's Isaiah Nair, or Wyoming's Isaiah Nair, originally from Arlington Lamar. I'll look up his stats, but he had 12 touchdowns, I think close to about 900 yards this year for the Cowboys. Entered the portal, originally committed to Tennessee, but took a visit to Texas and in short order flipped from Tennessee to Texas, and now probably becomes the number 2 wide receiver on this team, or will assuredly compete for it opposite of Xavier Worthy.
Well, he wanted to go to the real UT, so shout out to Isaiah Nair for that. And he also, I think, knew that Texas was going to beat Tennessee in the Big 12 SEC Challenge, so he wanted to go to
that's what did it for sure.
I think that's what did it, even though he committed and signed before that game happened. I think logically that makes a lot of sense. But you're right. Look, I'm excited about this get. Obviously a step up in competition going from the Mountain West to the Big 12. That goes without saying, but Texas needed wide receiver help. Xavier Worthy's a stud. What he did as a true freshman was incredible. You know, Jordan Whittington can play, but he's a guy who's dealt with injuries over the course of his entire Texas career. And then everybody else in that wide receiver room outside of those two guys is pretty much unproven. You lost Joshua Moore. You lost a couple of your best pass-catching tight ends as well, so you needed some weapons on the outside for this passing game, and hopefully Isaiah Nair can provide that. So you mentioned the 12 touchdowns, obviously a scoring threat. He's also a deep threat as well. I think he averaged like 20 yards per catch last year at Wyoming. So, you know, Xavier Worthy is a deep threat, a guy who can take the top off a defense. Seems like Isaiah Nair can be that type of player as well. So yeah, obviously a step up in competition. We'll see how his game transitions from Wyoming to Texas. But I think this guy has a chance to be this team's number 2 wide receiver, or at least a guy who gets pretty significant playing time as soon as he gets to Austin.
Yeah, basically what all you brought up is a lot of what Steve Sarkisian brought up yesterday at his signing day press conference. When you only add one high school guy, you get a lot of different questions, especially considering their work in the portal and work bringing in Gary Patterson, Brennan Mary, and Tashard Choice. But Nair, a guy, 44 catches, 878 yards, 12 touchdowns. Most of those touchdowns were in the back half of the year. If you listen to Everyone Gets a Trophy, they talked about how Wyoming kind of had to rotate quarterbacks. Josh Allen was not in Laramie this year, so they had a little revolving door at quarterback, but the consistent factor in that offense was Isaiah Nair. And the thing is, everybody knows about Bijan Robinson. Everyone knows about Xavier Worthy. But a guy like Nair, his task this upcoming season is to be that wide receiver 2 who can help take focus off Xavier Worthy, who can basically, as Steve Sarkisian said, bring balance to this offense that wasn't there. I think stylistically, if you wanted to think of a comparison, this is someone who probably is going to play the game like Troy O'Meary. I know that's odd to say, considering we haven't even seen Troy O'Meary take a snap in a Longhorn uniform, but kind of similar. I don't think he's got the exact same, large build, because O'Meary was doing what he was doing at about 6'3", 6'4", 220. Nair's 6'3", probably closer to like 210. But he's a guy he's not the burner like Worthy is, but he's someone who can catch those passes kind of at the sticks and make, things to where opponents have to dedicate some attention to him and maybe leave some boxes open for Bijan Robinson and some deep threat opportunities open for Xavier Worthy. But I'm
Yeah.
also glad you mentioned Jordan Whittington, because I think sometimes we just forget about him, and it's easy to, considering his injury history. But when he went down last year, Texas went away from its 3 wide receiver looks because they didn't think they had a third wide receiver. They almost didn't even have a second wide receiver who could really help out in that offense. So not just Nair, but getting a Jordan Whittington back and having Nair there as well. That's a solid. We said this last year, and it changed right before the season started, but that's a solid top line of wide receivers if you can have Nair, Whittington, Worthy, and then even Marcus Washington. I'm willing to throw him in there.
Okay. Yeah. Look, on paper, it sounds nice. We'll obviously see how it works out. Opposing defenses are going to put more of a target on Xavier Worthy this season, right? I mean, as a true freshman, he kind of burst on the scene last year. He wasn't the focal point of a lot of defensive coordinators a season ago. Well, everybody knows how good he is now, and everybody knows that he's Texas's number 1 wide receiver. So he's going to get some tough matchups throughout the entirety of the season. So it's going to be paramount for Texas to have some other weapons on the outside. Bijan's going to do his thing in the running back room. The running back room as a whole is really, really talented, but obviously you need more of a semblance of a passing game this year than you had last year, right? You need much more consistency through the air than you had in 2021. So hopefully these wide receivers can help out whoever wins this quarterback job and can make this team a little bit more multidimensional. And we get to see all of the benefits of the Steve Sarkisian offense in 2022.
The other major portal addition was Jaleel Billingsley, a tight end originally from the Chicagoland area, out of Alabama. Played a little bit in both this year's national championship game and last year's national championship game, but hit the portal pretty quickly after this year's game. And I think Texas was always kind of the place he wanted to go, considering his previous relationship with Jeff Banks and, of course, playing in Steve Sarkisian's offense. This was a position that Texas, I think they had some decent numbers there, but they didn't have any experience. And that's a position in this offense, especially if you're going to run 2 out there on the field, a decent amount, that you probably want some experience. I don't think he's as strong of a blocker as Steve Sarkisian may have mentioned, but he's definitely a guy who can bring that receiving aspect to the tight end position and be that constraint that, every now and then you can probably steal 10 yards or so with him and make defenses, unable to forget about him every so often, again, to open up the rest of the offense.
It's been a long time, Joe, since Texas has had an impact tight end. I don't know if Jaleel Billingsley can be that, but I think he's got the chance to be a significant threat in this passing game. I'm with you, not a great blocker, but a guy who got some playing time at Alabama the last couple of years, as you mentioned. This is not a Ben Davis situation where it's like, oh, yeah, the guy's coming from Alabama, so he was a highly touted recruit, and you feel like there's some potential there, but he didn't really play in college, so we don't know how good he actually is. Now, Jaleel Billingsley, even though he wasn't technically a starter in either of the last 2 seasons, he got some decent run at Alabama. So a talented guy who's got some receiving capabilities. He knows the Steve Sarkisian offense. You mentioned the relationship he has with Jeff Banks as well. And Texas has a void in terms of tight end talent and experience. They've got numbers, right? You talked about it with Gunnar Helm and Juan Davis and Jatavion Sanders and Braden Liebrock. Like, they've recruited quantity over the last couple of years in that tight end room, but not a lot of proven commodities. With Jared Wiley and Cade Brewer both leaving the program, those were pretty much your 2 top tight ends the last couple of years. So a hole there and a chance for Jaleel Billingsley to make an impact right away. So hopefully he could take another step and become a pass catching threat for this Texas team at tight end, because it's been a long time since they've had a reliable tight end threat on the 40 acres.
Yeah, and just looking at his stats over these past 2 seasons, split pretty evenly across the past 2 seasons. 35 catches, about 530-ish yards, 6 touchdowns, 3 in each the past 2 years. So guy gets his numbers. Of course, there's some great Alabama receivers there too who help him out. And I think the thing is, you're looking for Billingsley to be a factor in this offense. But with how much 12 personnel we saw Steve Sarkisian run last year, how much it seems like that's a facet that's not going away, you still need one of those other tight ends, either Jatavion Sanders, Gunnar Helm, Juan Davis, to to make a step this upcoming season, because I think, like I mentioned, Billingsley fits the receiving mold. Gunnar Helm and Jatavian Sanders, you kind of hope can be a little bit more all around, but more maybe in the blocking mold, and Juan Davis maybe behind Billingsley in the receiving mold. Still, there's a lot of opportunity at tight end, and that's a big reason why Billingsley even made it to Austin in the first place.
No doubt. I'm weary about 12 personnel, Joe. I was worried about that going into last season because I just didn't think the tight ends were talented enough to run that. Now, Texas didn't have enough on the outside, so Sark's hands were tied a little bit in terms of the personnel packages that he could use to maximize the talent with this offense. But, man, I'd rather see 2 backs on the field than 2 tight ends on the field. And if you get those 3 healthy wide receivers that we talked about a couple of minutes ago with Worthy, Whittington, and Nair, like I'd rather see more of that than see 2 tight ends on the field. So there's an opportunity there. I mean, all of these guys are relatively highly touted recruits. You've got a couple of 4-stars in there, and hell, to get scholarship offers from Texas, you have to have some sort of ability. So you'd like to think a couple of those guys can step up and make this offense be able to run 12 personnel successfully next season. But I'm going to be weary and skeptical until I actually see it. I'm praying JT Sanders can be that dude, the one 5-star Texas recruited in the transition class of 2021. I thought we'd see more from him last year. We barely saw him at all last season. So hopefully he can take a step and live up to some of the hype and potential that we were sold when he came to UT. But yeah, I mean, there are some bodies there, Joe, but like until I see it on a Saturday in the fall, I'm going to be a little skeptical of any of those guys, let alone 2 of those guys being impact players for this team.
Yeah, we've gone over the JT Sanders situation plenty of times. Obviously, this is a huge spring for him, but with Billingsley and with Nair, at least on the offensive side of the ball, do you think? And of course, you got to add in Quinn Ewers when you're talking about portal additions. Do you think everything that needed to be addressed on the offensive side of the ball, at least as far as they could through the portal, has been?
Yeah, it sort of feels that way. I mean, offensive line, I wouldn't have minded them getting somebody from the portal. They crushed it in terms of offensive line recruiting, and we'll get to that here in a second. But I'm weary about relying on true freshman offensive linemen to play significant roles for any team, let alone a team that plays in a power conference and has Alabama in the non-con schedule this year. So I wouldn't have hated Sark and company to have found a proven offensive lineman, a guy who could plug and play in as a starter, a Calvin Anderson type, a Parker Braun type, just looking at a couple of the names that Texas has gotten over the last few years that have been pretty much plug and play starters from day one. So I wouldn't have hated that, but yeah, they needed a receiver. They got one. I wouldn't hate them getting a second receiver. They needed a tight end, I think, and they got one. They obviously needed quarterback help, and they got one with Quinn Ewers. That feels like ages ago. But yeah, for the most part, Joe, I feel like they've done a pretty good job attacking offensive needs in the portal, but there are still a couple of holes that I think they could fill if there are guys out there.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think just taking a 7-man offensive line class makes it tough to add in the portal. And it's, I don't want to say it's pick your poison because it was a good outcome either way, but it's, which path do you want to go? Do you want to have a developmental path, or do you want to grab a guy right away? And who knows if they would have been able to sign the high school class they did if they had taken somebody out of the portal.
Yeah.
But with all that said, I'm kind of on the side of they need to address, there's some defensive spots they need to address in the portal. So if you're asking me, do you go linebacker / safety, or do you go offensive lineman? I think considering the class they signed with this type of hindsight, you go with those guys on defense at this point. And they added a defensive back in Ryan Watts, who probably translates to a boundary corner spot, but still probably has some needs at safety and assuredly has some needs at linebacker. They even mentioned that Steve Sarkisian even mentioned that at a signing day press conference that they'd like to have one more body at that linebacker spot. And there's still time. Spring opens up these doors, exit doors for a lot of programs, entrance doors at others. Still probably a chance we see someone. There's room. Obviously, edge is another one. They look good for O'Shawn Mathis from TCU, who by all accounts has a lot of power programs after him, but also needs to finish his time at TCU, get his degree, and has those power programs after him, but Texas still looks good there. So I think linebacker and safety, I would go there over the offensive line at this point, considering the high school class they signed, including the one addition they made on signing day in Arlington Bowie 5-star Devin Campbell. Just a guy who is, I think he could play tackle, but he's going to be a guard at this level. And I had an idea of how to look at him. 6'3", 310, but has really long arms, good wingspan. I kind of think of him as a, not to slight him, but this is a comparison, an improved version of Denzel Okafor, a guy who has that tackle guard versatility. His best football is playing guard, but also is higher ranked than Denzel Okafor and is probably going to play better than Denzel Okafor did throughout his career.
I sure hope he's better than Denzel Okafor. No slight to Denzel Okafor, but it's hard for me to say no slight when I just slighted him. I'm excited about Devin Campbell, Devon Campbell, DJ Campbell, whatever the hell we're supposed to call this guy. But nice icing on the cake for what is a tremendous offensive line class for Texas and a tremendous overall class for the Longhorns, a top 5 class in the country coming off of a 5-7 season. I don't think a lot of people expected that. So Sark and company took advantage of all of the coaching turnover. We've talked about that in previous episodes of this podcast. And I think you really saw that with the offensive line too. So excited about Campbell. I'm with you. I think he projects more as a guard at the next level. That dude's a mauler, man. He's violent and he is a beast. And I'm really excited to see what he can bring to the table. I don't think he quite has the length or the frame to be a tackle. Once again, I think he projects more to be a guard, but hell, you need guards too. And running between the tackles is a big part of the Sark offense. You would love to utilize your talented running back room with good offensive line play, right? You felt like the running backs were limited last season because of the guys blocking for them up front. Hopefully next year and obviously beyond, you don't have to worry about the offensive line nearly as much as we've had to worry about it in the past. So yeah, excited about Campbell beating Oklahoma for a big time recruit. Never a bad thing. And yeah, once again, icing on the cake, Joe, for a really, really good offensive line class for Sark and Kyle Flood.
You mentioned the coaching changes that helped out. We've also talked about how NIL, Pancake Factory, Horns for Hearts, the Clark Field Collective, all those different things were beneficial to the Longhorns throughout the stretch. But with Campbell, Texas basically seemed to lead the entire way. And whether it was Georgia, Alabama, Oklahoma, even USC, Texas seemed to have the inside track on this recruitment throughout the whole process, whether it was, junior days a couple of years ago, visiting in the summer, visiting in November. Texas seemed to have the inside track on Devon Campbell throughout the whole process. And credit to Kyle Flood for bringing that one home all the way, up to the very last second. This was a process that Campbell wanted to, get all the information possible. He wanted to take it to the end. He did, but Kyle Flood throughout the whole way seemed like he led and finished the race as well.
Yeah, the highest rated recruit Texas signed in this year's class, right? A 5-star, according to some, a top 10 player in the country. So a great get for Texas. And offensive line play has been severely lacking at the University of Texas over the last 10, 12 years. Everybody focuses on the quarterback position, and look, rightfully so. It's the most important position in all of sports. And Texas has struggled to find consistency there, but Texas has also really struggled to find consistency up front. And it's tough to win games at this level, at any level, if you don't have good offensive line play. And Texas way too often has been dominated in the trenches by schools that shouldn't be dominating Texas in the trenches over the last 12 years. So I don't know, Joe, if it's fair or reasonable to expect any or all of these guys to make an impact in 2022. I said it earlier, I get a little nervous when you're relying on any true freshman, let alone true freshman offensive linemen, to make an impact. But because of the inconsistencies we've seen from the guys already on campus, feels like there might be an opportunity for one or two of these guys to maybe compete for a starting job as a true freshman.
That leads me to my next question. I was going to set the over-under with a 7-man class, and I know that's a lot, but consider they only signed 2 in the 2021 class. That's 9 over a 2-year cycle. That's just right. But with this 7-man class, with the way the offensive line played in the 2021 season, I'll set the over-under at 1.5. So by week 1, do you think over or under 1.5 offensive linemen from this 2022 class will be part of the starting five.
Who do you think are the most likely? Is it Devin Campbell and Kelvin Banks? Like, are those the easy answers?
I think that's the easy answer, but here's the thing. With Devin Campbell specifically, there's some guys who played pretty well or played well in spurts throughout 2021 who are ahead of him. I don't see anybody unseating Junior Angulau. I don't see Devin Campbell playing center. I don't see him taking Jake Major's spot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Hayden Connor is going to be a tough guy to take his spot because he played pretty darn well in his limited action in 2021. So as far as the interior, I think that's going to be a tough place to break in, which is why it has me leaning under.
Mm-hmm.
But I think between Andre Karich, Christian Jones, even Jalen Garth, I'm forgetting one more, but there's still questions at tackle, especially with Derek Kerstetter moving on, to where I think Kelvin Banks, even though he's not enrolling early, that's a guy who could compete for a spot at least by week one, and maybe even as the season goes on, getting into conference play, getting into October.
I'll say under 1.5 to start the season, but I'll say over 1.5 by the end of the season, Joe. And look, I want whoever starts to start all 12 games, right? That's best case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
That means your offensive line is playing really well and nobody gets hurt and you don't have to shuffle things up front. That's best case scenario at really every position on the field, but feels unrealistic with what we've seen from the guys who are already on campus. So I'll say under 1.5 to start the year, but we'll be over 1.5 by the end of the year. Hell, maybe by the time we hit conference play, who knows? I mean, look at the Alabama game in week 2, right? Like I'm terrified of that matchup. I'm terrified of every single matchup of that matchup, but the Texas O-line going up against Will Anderson and the Alabama defensive line, that terrifies me. So if the starters, sophomores, juniors, seniors, struggle in that game, and Sark's like, all right, this isn't working, let's try something else, and he inserts a freshman or two, and those guys play pretty well, like they hold their own, they might have the job by week 3. So there's a chance, because of the potential of this offensive line class, that even if it doesn't happen in the spring or the fall, by the time we get into conference play, let alone the end of the season, you've got a few of these guys making a significant impact for this team.
Yeah, you mentioned week 3. That's UTSA, and I don't really call it a trap game because I think a lot of Texas fans know what UTSA can do, but week after Alabama, right before conference play, maybe it sort of is. But I think with Kelvin Banks, basically he has to beat Christian Jones, Isaiah Hookfin, that was the name I forgot, Andre Karich, and
Connor
and Jalen Garth.
Oh, Garth. Yeah.
Those are the tackles that he's got to beat. So if he can do that in enrolling in the summer and earning his spot, I can definitely see that, because if you watch Kelvin Banks' film, I don't know of a more violent person on the move than I've seen in Kelvin Banks. And he's not a guy who, like Christian Jones, played in a run first option offense in high school. This is someone who has experience with pass sets, but Will Anderson, that's a whole different animal. And I don't know if that's a guy you want to throw into that fire right away, but maybe it is. Maybe he is able to have a better camp than all those 4 that I mentioned and be ready to start. So I think I go under, though, but I think maybe towards the end of the year, especially with injuries on the offensive line, there's no guarantee. I bet you could see two of those guys seeing playing time, maybe even 3, but I'm trying to figure out who that third would be is the thing.
Yeah, maybe it's Cameron Williams. I know he's only a 3-star. He's not the most talked about offensive line recruit in this class, but from some people I've talked to, he might be one of, if not the most college-ready offensive lineman that Texas brought in. I don't think the ceiling or potential for him is as high as a Campbell or a Kelvin Banks, but there are people who believe that he might be one of, if not the most likely guy who can start and make an impact as a true freshman. I feel like I've said make an impact too much. I'll try to think of a synonym to prevent me from saying that so much, but maybe he's another guy who could look out for. Once again, only a 3-star, not the highest touted guy that Texas brought in, but some people I trust have hinted at this guy maybe being more college ready than some of the other guys the Longhorns brought in.
All right. Anything else in the football department, or want to talk a little bit of Texas hoops?
Let's talk some hoops, man.
All right. So last show we did was on the 19th. That was just after a loss to Oklahoma State, I believe, or to Kansas State. Since then, they went 3-1, 2-1 in the Big 12, 1-0 against Rick Barnes and his return. And it's been some kind of different styles. Two slogs, Oklahoma State and Tennessee. I think we can kind of skip over the Oklahoma State game a little bit. TCU was what this team, I feel like, looks at when they are going full bore, look their best, and when, just peak Chris Beard style of basketball.
Yeah.
Not always pretty, but successful. 73-50. And it wasn't easy to get to that 73, but it wasn't easy for TCU to get to that 50. And of course, it was also at the largest crowd ever at Schollmeyer Arena as well.
I'm with you. Yeah, that was the most complete performance of the season for the Longhorns. And TCU is not a bad team, right? If the season ended today, TCU would be in the tournament. They're not a great team. They're not a 1 or 2 seed or anything like that. They're not a threat to win the Big 12 this year, but that's a quality team. You mentioned it, a record crowd in Fort Worth to go in there and just dominate. I mean, Texas went up double digits early, and they never really let TCU sniff a comeback. Like every time TCU scored 2 or 4 points in a row, it's like Texas had an answer. You never really felt like this game was in doubt. So complete performance, utter domination on the road against a tournament team. We hadn't seen that from Texas this season until that game in Fort Worth. So that was good to see. You got contributions from everybody. And the Longhorns shot the ball pretty well. You mentioned it. They were efficient on both ends of the floor. That is as pretty of a Chris Beard performance as you could imagine if you're Texas. They're not going to be scoring in the 80s or 90s hardly ever. But to score in the 70s and hold your opponent to 50, that's complete. That's getting it done on both ends of the floor. So obviously a lot to like from that performance. And it shows you that, okay, if things are clicking for Texas, they can do some pretty good things.
I think one of the biggest takeaways from that game is I've got 2 of them. One, the success of this team, yeah, sometimes it's predicated on guard play, but I think it's really predicated on Timmy Allen. And that was not a game that was close. It never got closer than 15 in the second half. Timmy Allen still played 38 minutes and scored 16 points, had 8 rebounds. Basically, when he is on, that's the best chance for this team. And we've talked about the point guard issues that this team has. When he brings the ball up, it kind of seems to open up the offense. And it's not that opportunity isn't always available just because he's a decent ball handler for a guy his size, but he's still limited by ball handling at some point. Sure. And he's also just a below the rim player. He's not going to get up there and start throwing high flying dunks, but he's just a good basketball player. And when he's able to get his opportunities, 6 for 13, got to the line, 4 for 4 from the line, 8 rebounds, that's when Texas is at its best. So I think a lot of the keys to this team revolve around Timmy Allen, and seeing him succeed at that TCU game is a big reason why they were successful. The other thing is Brock Cunningham is earning his minutes. And I harken back to a couple of years ago during this stretch right before the coronavirus shutdown. I think Shaka Smart said, I can't take this guy off the floor. And that's when Brock Cunningham, he'll may score 3 points, may score 0 points, but he does so many different things when he's not accumulating fouls that just help the team win. Yeah. And I think Chris Beard may also kind of be in that situation to where, yeah, he knows Brock Cunningham's not going to fill up the stat sheet, at least in the points department, but he pulled down 7 rebounds, had 4 assists, looking at the TCU box score, 4 points. Made a couple, good scoring moves without the ball. He's become so valuable to this team that when he can stay on the floor and not pick up fouls, he does a lot to just help the team win. And we saw that at TCU.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the part of the box score where Brock Cunningham shows up way too often, right? He does foul a lot, but Chris Beard's raved about him too. You mentioned Shaka Smart. Chris Beard calls them Brock plays. Right. And yeah, it's stuff that doesn't show up in the box score, stuff that doesn't show up on the stat sheet, but impact the outcome of games. And that's what Brock Cunningham does, man. He's diving on the floor for every loose ball. He's taking charges. He's attacking the glass on both ends of the floor. He does a lot of things that help teams win. And yeah, like somebody asked me the other day, how many minutes should Chris Beard play Brock Cunningham? How many minutes per game does he need to get? And I'm like, I don't know if it's good to have a plan for Brock Cunningham. Like put him in early in a game. If he has it, if he's doing those Brock plays, if he's making those impact plays, then keep him out there. And some nights he just doesn't have it. Like some nights he's a little bit of a liability. So you don't need to like force feed him minutes if he's not on. But when he does what he did in Fort Worth, yeah, absolutely. You have to give him minutes. And those type of plays really impacted that game. And yeah, when Texas is on, they're getting significant contributions from Brock Cunningham too. So I'm with you on that. And then on Timmy Allen, I agree. We'll get to the Texas Tech game here in a minute, but like you saw great Timmy Allen against TCU. Texas looked awesome. You saw horrible Timmy Allen against Texas Tech, and Texas was lost on the offensive end of the floor. So, yeah, he does feel like for a long time I would have said Marcus Carr, and look, he's still very, very important to the success of this team. But, hey, Marcus Carr played really well against Texas Tech, and UT still struggled. So it just feels like Timmy Allen is kind of that calming force, even though he's not a point guard. He can facilitate, and he's just that like guy you need to rely on to be consistent for you offensively. When he's doing that, Texas is good. When he's not doing that, Texas is looking for answers on the offensive end of the floor. So I agree with you on both of those sentiments.
I think as weird as it sounds, the big stat you have to look at, minutes. And over these past few games, at least in Big 12 play, Timmy Allen has had more than 30 minutes in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games. And they've played 9 Big 12 games. Texas Tech only got 21. Iowa State only got 13. That's because he got 2 fouls in the first 30 seconds. Like this is the guy that they look for to be, a facilitator in this offense, whether that's bringing the ball up the floor or once the ball's already brought up the floor. So he's the guy. Marcus Carr can get his own shot. Is essential to this team in a different way, but I kind of think that Timmy Allen is the number one, and I think you could see that in the way they handled some late game situations. I think what was it against? I think it was against the Tennessee game, which now we can get into. That's who they drew up the final play for. They didn't draw it up for Marcus Carr. They didn't draw it up for anybody else. They drew it up for Timmy Allen, and luckily he was able to hit that one free throw. Texas got a little lucky in that Tennessee missed their 3-point shot. Before we get into the whole Rick Barnes aspect of it, my take from the Tennessee game was you can't blow a 17-point lead without building a 17-point lead.
Yeah.
And the way they built that 17-point lead was a lot of defense, preventing good looks by the Volunteers, earning their looks on the opposite end. But then Tennessee ratcheted up the intensity, and Texas didn't seem to be able to handle it, which is why Tennessee was able to come back in those late minutes.
Yeah, people sometimes describe games as a tale of two halves, right? Like one team dominates in the first half, but then struggles in the second half, and a team blows a halftime lead and the other team wins. This game wasn't that. This game was a tale of multiple halves within one half, right? It was a 2-point game at halftime, but then Texas was dominant for the first 12 minutes of the second half, and they built that lead to 17, like you said, Joe, and then they just completely fell apart. And Tennessee was able to get some buckets. Tennessee was able to get some stops. Texas just flatlined completely offensively. Some things that we've seen way too often this year, and some things that we've seen way too often from Texas as a program over the last, 5 to 10 years showed up, and Tennessee got back into the game. So you're right. Like, thankfully, Texas built that huge lead to where they could afford that god-awful 8-minute stretch of basketball that they had in the final 8 minutes on Saturday. But obviously, you're playing with fire if you're going to go that long without scoring a damn point. So, what looked like it was going to be just a momentum building type of win, and like, hey, you looked really good against a ranked team, and you ended up putting them away with minutes to spare, and it was an emotional game, obviously, with Rick Barnes in town. Like, that would have been an awesome moment for Texas basketball, and maybe a defining moment in year one for Chris Beard to this point. And look, Texas still won. It's still their first and only win over a ranked team this season. You still won the Rick Barnes game. So at the end of the day, a win is a win is a win. But it went from like what should have been a feel great moment to just, unfortunately, we're not quite as consistent, and we're not quite where we would like to be at this point in the season.
I think what guys like Mark Smith for Kansas State, Zakai Ziegler did this for Tennessee, and I can look up who it was for Tech. But what those guys show, I guess Kevin McCullough to a certain extent, and Davion Warren, just that Texas can get out-athleted. Yeah. And that's how Tennessee got back into the game. A lot of dribble drives that opened up some looks that Tennessee finally started to hit from the outside that weren't there in the first half. That's how Kansas State won. Mark Smith, aside from going off, was able to dribble past Marcus Carr. And then I guess we can even start to get into that Tech game. There were some bad, just straight up blow-bys on Marcus Carr and Courtney Ramey to where, yeah, there was some effort, but there was also just general athleticism that you didn't see from Texas and that they lack this year that they're gonna have to overcome throughout the course of the year.
Yeah, I think there are 3 obvious roster deficiencies on this Texas basketball team, and I think we're far enough into the season to know that these are real and know that these probably aren't going away before the end of this year. Number 1 is the lack of athleticism. That's obvious, and we've seen that even in Texas wins. These guys just aren't quick enough. Way too many guys are getting blown off the dribble, and it's not like opposing teams are attacking one defender, right? It's any of these guys have been susceptible to getting blown by off the dribble. So that showed up a lot in Lubbock a couple of nights ago. We saw that against K-State. Yeah, we've seen that way too often over the course of the year. So lateral quickness and just overall athleticism, it's an issue for this team. Number 2, there's no rim protector. Right? Like it's one thing if your guards can't stay in front of other guards, but if you have that back line of defense at the rim who can turn away any shot, then that helps. Like you can get away with not having that great perimeter defense. Texas doesn't have that. If they had a Jericho Sims, if they had a Kai Jones, if they had both of those guys, then okay, you wouldn't notice the guards getting blown by way too often. But because there's no great back line of defense for this team, yeah, I mean, it leads to way too many easy buckets for the opposition. And then the third one is there's just no true point guard. Like Marcus Carr is a stud. You know, Devin Askew could become that, and he does a lot of things that you want a point guard to do, but still you don't quite have that true facilitating point guard. We just talked about it. Like Timmy Allen is kind of the guy who facilitates this offense when this offense is at its best. So there are some roster deficiencies that, look, I think Texas is still going to make the tournament, but ultimately those 3 things will lead to this team's downfall. It'll be why Texas doesn't win the Big 12 this season, and it'll be why Texas ultimately comes up short of achieving the Monday night thing that Chris Beard talked about during his introductory presser.
Yeah, I think Devin Askew will get there, but it just may be in 2 years because he may be the best natural ball handler. He may be maybe even the best on-ball defender. That may be something I only think. But the fact that he doesn't look to score kind of limits what he can do. But anyway, none of that really mattered against Texas Tech. That was, I think I mentioned this to you. I've never been to a louder arena. I think the most hyped up football environment I've seen was at least at Texas. I think there was that Oklahoma State game a few years ago. USC in 2018, Iowa State 2018, Notre Dame. This past year for football, easily Arkansas. That place was amped up and ready to go. I can't think, and not that I've been to a lot of great environments as far as basketball goes, just because I haven't been to Allen Fieldhouse, haven't been to Cameron Indoor. I've been to Baylor, been to TCU, been to A&M, but I've never seen a louder environment than what United Supermarkets Arena was. And I thought Texas did okay. I think I'd give them like a 4.5 out of 10 for certain extents of that game. But that first half, there was a point when things started rolling for Texas Tech. Chris Beard didn't call a timeout.
Yeah.
And it got out of hand. Texas fought their way back, but as the first half went on, it got out of hand again. Sometimes some things you can account for, like just those blow-bys and the crowd momentum type plays. You can't really account for Kevin O'Banner going 5 for 7 for 3 when he's shooting 31% on the year.
Yeah.
But
how about all the shooter's touches that guy got, man?
Yeah, I wish I could hit the dead spot and get the roll like he did. But basically, Chris Beard, to an extent, that team across from him at Texas Tech, a lot of it was built by him. Not all of it, O'Banner wasn't, but a lot of it was built by him. Has operated in that style and that system for several years now, kind of going a little bit more on all cylinders than the Texas team that was put together this year. Has some roster deficiencies. Throw in the environment, throw in team maybe both teams maybe playing a little bit tighter because of what was the storyline, and Texas just couldn't handle all of that as the second half went on.
Did you wear any burnt orange on Tuesday?
No, I had a St. Thomas shirt and a little vest on. So so the official capacity of United Supermarkets Arena, I think I looked it up. It's 15,300. I don't think there were more than 50 people wearing burnt orange there.
How about that?
I think it was about 15,250, all wearing black. And the other thing is, it's kind of split into four quadrants. You got one side sideline, one side sideline, and then the baseline sections.
Mm-hmm.
The entire baseline section near the Texas bench. So about 4 lower bowl sections and 4 upper deck sections filled by 30 minutes ago before the game started, and just ready to berate Chris Beard, who was surrounded by as many Lubbock police officers I've ever seen in one place.
You think Chris Beard thought that would happen? You think when he took the Texas job, he thought he would get that type of reaction when he came back to Lubbock? I don't think he did. I don't think that would have impacted whether or not he went to Austin.
Right.
But I think he thought he was going to get a little bit more love because of all the success he had in his 5 years at Lubbock. I didn't think when he took this job, he anticipated needing 5 or 6 security guards walking him on and off the floor on Tuesday night. Obviously, as we got closer to the start of the season and closer to this game, everybody knew that Tech fans were pissed and they were going to unleash everything on Chris Beard. But I just wonder, when he took this job, if he realized what type of animosity he would get from folks on the South Plains.
Well, he learned on Monday when that team bus showed up and there were thousands of Tech students ready to berate him right before practice started. So
it was a great atmosphere, man. It really was.
It's the best it's the best basketball atmosphere I've ever seen. And when you got guys like Jeff Goodman saying this goes toe to toe with anywhere, that's a guy to believe. That guy's been all over the country as far as basketball environments go, and they bring it. I don't think they'll reach a peak like that this year,
right?
Considering Beard was there, but Beard helped build that. He really did. And what he built was there to face him on Tuesday. And not only he, but his team just couldn't stack up to it. So what did you see, at least from deficiency-wise? Because I think we always like to talk about athleticism. And as we've mentioned, Arterio Morris, Dylan Mitchell, Rowan Brumball, those are the guys that will help that going forward, specifically next year in some key spots. But I think the other deficiency that we have to talk about with this team that we've seen in every game is when you play as slow as they do, when you have as few possessions as they do, you can't go as bad from behind the arc as they consistently seem to do. That's the key to this team, or one of the big keys to this team. And their losses, you can point towards 3-point shooting to see that's where they lose a lot of these games.
It's been an issue for Texas for a long, long time. I think Texas was flustered by the atmosphere early, kind of like the game at the Kennel against Gonzaga early on, where just early on Gonzaga threw the first punch and Texas really couldn't fully get up off the mat. Texas mounted a nice run, right? Tech went up 12 very early. Then Texas cut it to 3, but by halftime, the Red Raiders were up 14. So just, it felt like the atmosphere played a role in what took place on Tuesday night. And it just feels like Tech is the better team right now than Texas is. I'm with you, man. The offensive struggles are obvious. For me, what was more frustrating was the first half defense for Texas. If you told me Texas was going to score 64 points in this game, I would have felt like, hey, they got a damn good shot to win this thing, because Tech isn't known for being a great offensive juggernaut this year either. So the fact that, Texas gives up 54, 55 points per game this season, they gave up 43 in the first half, and Tech shot well over 50% in that first half. That to me was the more frustrating thing. I expected this team to struggle on offense. I almost expected every night, but in that environment against that defense, I figured there would be some problems on that end of the floor, but they just gave up way too many easy buckets. Some of it were blow-bys like we talked about, but some of them just lapses. Guys not being where they were supposed to be, guys not paying attention to backdoor cuts, just total brain farts for Texas. And that to me was really why Texas Tech was able to get out to that big lead in the first half was just Texas defensively. They didn't bring it against a team that obviously was motivated and ready and hungry to play.
Yeah, if you look at the split between the first and second half, it was 43-29 Red Raiders in the first half, and then Texas won the second half 35-34. Never really able to cut that lead down, but played an even game. But it was basically those two runs between the under 16 and the under 12. Texas kind of responded, got it back into 3, but that last run at the end of the first half, it all just built up. And Chris Beard, he said after the game, I'm not one to use timeouts with an experienced team. It's easy to look back in hindsight about that, but when your first timeouts with about 1:30 left and your team's down 14, that's when it's kind of too late at that point.
I was saying it in real time. I don't think that's a hindsight conversation, right? Like, I think about Bill Self, that guy will use all 4 of his timeouts in the first half if he feels like he needs to take an opposing environment out of the game, if he feels like his team is just struggling to get things figured out. That might be extreme, but I think what Chris Beard did was too extreme the other way. You had to, that crowd wasn't going to go away, right? They were going to be loud and obnoxious the whole time. This is more for just on the floor. Like, you had to try to do something to thwart Texas Tech's momentum during those huge runs. They had 2 big runs in the first half, and Chris Beard pretty much sat idly by. So I disagree with that. I think that might be a Chris Beard thing. Like, I hearken back, and some of the Tech people I talked to said that he would frustrate them with his lack of timeouts in first halves of games that might have been getting away from them. So that just might be a Chris Beard staple. But I don't know if it would have impacted the outcome of the game, but I really think it's something Chris Beard should have done to try to stall a little bit of that Tech momentum.
I'm with you. What do you think? Anything else from that Tech game, or you want to start looking towards this really important, maybe even the toughest stretch on the schedule?
Look, I will say this. I'm glad that Texas fans are passionate about basketball right now. Some of the comments that I've seen, some of the tweets and posts that I've seen are ridiculous. People giving up on Chris Beard midway through year 1 when he's coaching a ranked basketball team that had 4 scholarship players coming back from last year. People saying Shaka's better than this, and this guy's Tom Herman 2.0. Like, the takes are ridiculous, but I'm glad there's passion there. It just feels like there's been a general apathy towards the Texas basketball program over the last decade or so, right? The end of Rick Barnes and then the majority of the Shaka Smart era. It just felt like people didn't care. And look, Texas basketball is always going to be third. It'll never be football. It'll never be baseball. I know that. But, Joe, I've seen a lot of passion and a lot of people actually into this Texas basketball program. So as much as like the dumb takes annoy the hell out of me, I'm glad people are watching this team and caring about this team, because I just don't think that's been there for the last few years. And I'll say this, I've said it before, I'll say it again until proven wrong. Don't close a book on a coach midway through year 1. Don't give up on Chris Beard, all right? Like, Moody Center's coming, the new practice facility's coming. He's not going to need to bring in 7 transfers every single season to fill out a makeshift roster. Like, he's going to build and grow this thing. I know what he said at the introductory press conference. Hell, he said stuff like that at every introductory press conference he's ever done. He was 18-14 in year 1 at Texas Tech. And obviously in year 2, he had them playing in the Elite 8. Year 3, they're playing for a national title. Like, just give this thing some time. I'm glad people care. I'm glad people are passionate, but can we please quit the ridiculous Shaka was better and Tom Herman 2.0 and this guy's a bum kind of takes when this team is 16-6 and they're in the top half of the best league in college basketball, and they're a ranked team right now. Like, ridiculous some of the stuff that we've seen from fans after every loss this year.
Yeah, well, welcome. Yeah.
I know. No, I've been covering that. I see it with football and baseball, right? I haven't seen it in basketball. It just felt like, people, Shaka Smart last year, 6 years with no tournament wins after that ACU loss. And people were like, oh, let's keep him around. Let's keep him around for another. It's like, it just hasn't been there. So I'm glad it's there on one hand, but it's like, man, year 1, I feel like people are harsher on Chris Beard than they were on Sark. Sark went 5-7, didn't make a bowl game. And Chris Beard is like going to lead Texas to the tournament, and they're ranked right now. I don't know. Maybe you're seeing something different on the message boards. Maybe it doesn't bother you as much as it bothers me. Once again, to an extent, I'm happy that people are passionate about this program, because that just hasn't been there. But man, giving up on a coach midway through what hasn't been a bad first season just feels weird to me.
So you mentioned the four returners, and I think there's a conversation to be had about two of them. One of them, I think, is Chase Febris. And there's a portion of me that after that Tech game and after seeing him, some people want to think that he's still hampered by a knee injury, and that still may be true. But if he's playing and if he's doing what he did against Tech and in these other games, that's not a guy who needs minutes. Like
Yeah.
that guy has been, if he's not hitting threes, which is his game, that is a not a net negative. That's just a total negative on the floor right now. The other one that I'm curious to what you think about is Andrew Jones. Andrew Jones has not been playing very good basketball. Oklahoma State, he was a huge liability on the floor. Texas Tech, he struggled both offensively and defensively. So I'm kind of curious. I think we may be on the same page with Febris, but what does Andrew Jones need to do? And is there any real solution to him struggling as he has in that 6-man role?
Yeah, I'm with you on Febris, man. Like that guy's supposed to be a knockdown shooter, and he's just not knocking down shots. So, look, Chris Beard, I think, was trying everything. We saw that with Avery Benson getting some minutes in the first half on Tuesday. He was just looking for a spark. So that's probably why Febris got some run. He was getting good looks, but he wasn't knocking them down. And he's not like an elite defensive player. He's not a great ball handler. Like that's what Febris is supposed to be able to do. And if he can't do that, yeah, there's no reason to have him on the floor. And then Andrew Jones, I was like thinking Andrew Jones was hurt for parts of the game on Tuesday, but every time he was out there, you noticed him for all the wrong reasons, right? He was getting blown by on defense. He wasn't attacking the glass like he should have been. He was struggling offensively to get his shots. Like just, I don't know what it is. Like at times this year, he's looked like Texas's best player. And then at times, he just hasn't been engaged. So you can't have that. In this league, you really can't have that on the road against a team like Texas Tech. You can't have guys who are supposed to be your best players just not engaged. And Andrew Jones wasn't that. So, man, I don't know if it's the 6-man thing and he's just pissed about it, so he's sulking and not trying as hard as he should, or if it's just, I don't know, he's not quite getting the system. But it's disappointing to see the inconsistencies of a guy who's been in college for as long as he has. Like he's a guy that I thought was going to have a much bigger impact on this team than he actually has. And, if he doesn't start to turn things around, I don't know how far this team's going to go.
Yeah, well, I think the obvious starting five is the one they've been carrying. And I think that if you wanted to switch it up, you maybe go Jones instead of Bishop. But yeah, it seems like he always has a lull every year, and we're just going through it again. And I know it's one of those things where, since the year that he lost due to leukemia and also the redshirt year, he's been back. He's been full bore, and he just always seems to have a lull this time every year. So we'll see if he can play out of it. Sorry.
We're losing him.
There we go.
Got the Raider rash.
He always seems to play into this, but there are points when he plays out of it, and that's the Andrew Jones that you still hope to get. So kind of going forward, mentioned it, Iowa State at home, Kansas at home on Big Monday, then at Baylor. 2-1 is a wildly successful streak, right?
Yeah, no doubt about it. Right. They're in the middle of this 5-game gauntlet against ranked teams that started with Tennessee. So they're 1-1 right now. If they could go 3-2 through this stretch, that'd be awesome. Feels like they have to go 2-3. And Iowa State's their most winnable game. Iowa State's not that good anymore. They were 13-0 in non-con. They're 3-6 in the Big 12. Now, one of those wins, of course, came against Texas, but Iowa State, like most teams, has been much better at home this season. So like that, I think Texas is going to be favored in this game. I think Texas should be favored. And that feels like a game. It ain't a must win, but it feels like an important game for Texas to win because, Kansas and Baylor are way better than Iowa State right now. So if they could find 2 wins in the next 3, Joe, that'd be awesome. I'd feel really good about this team. And I mean, a win against Kansas or at Baylor would be this team's most impressive win of the season in terms of the NCAA selection committee. So if they can take one of those 2, that would be incredible. And I think that'd give people a lot more confidence about this basketball team going towards the latter part of February.
Yeah. So Iowa State, let's see, they are 28th in the NET rankings. So a game at home against them barring any big changes this week. I don't know who the Cyclones play, but a
They
win over
already
the 28.
They already
They
lost.
played.
They lost to Kansas this week, so that won't change by Saturday.
So that's a quadrant one game, and that's what you need in order to make the tournament and improve your seeding. That's what the committee looks at. Iowa State's got 6 quadrant one wins, which is pretty impressive. Texas only has 3. They're 3-5 in their opportunities. They're also 13-1 at home, so they need to defend the Irwin Center. This is going to be one of those games.
Oh, the mute feature coming in clutch.
Don't want the people to hear that. This is a big game, and I think all the entire Big 12 is in the top 75 of the NET. Kansas State is number 75, so that's an important metric. Getting those games on the road, at home, neutral sites are not going to be anymore. But you got to win these quadrant one games because that's what the selection committee looks at, and this looks like it'll be another one. If not, it'll be a quadrant 2, and Texas has done well there. 4-1 in quadrant 2 games. I think Kansas State is their only quadrant 2 loss, if I had to guess.
Mm-hmm.
Haven't played a quadrant 3, undefeated in quadrant 4, which you don't want to play that many, but if you're going to be undefeated, that's the best possible outcome. So these are the types of games to where, like I think I mentioned to you a couple of weeks ago, it seems like 9-9, at least with this backloaded schedule, would be positive. And I think technically, the pundits would call them a bubble team. But if you go 99 in the Big 12, especially with the teams still ahead of them on the schedule, that means 4-5 over this last stretch.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good way to end it. Maybe get one more win in Kansas City to solidify it. And I know there are higher aspirations, but that'll put Texas in the tournament this year. And that's about all you can really, even though Chris Beard, to his own fault, credit, whatever you want to call it, mentioned Monday night, making the tournament's also important. And 5-4, 4-5 over that stretch, 9-9. I think that gets them in.
Make the dance and you got a chance, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And I think 9-9 will definitely get Texas in, especially with that Tennessee win, right? Tennessee's a tournament team in another conference. Texas didn't have that. Texas didn't have that like big quality non-con win before that. So that will help with the resume too. I think they'll get in at 8-10 too, but like to feel safe, you want to be at 500 for sure.
Exactly. You made some travels up to Kansas and Missouri last week, didn't you? And it did not go as well for the home teams as you wish it would have.
No. I got to wrap things up here pretty shortly, but I'll answer your question, even though I hate it. Yeah, I got some bad luck lately. I went to watch the Big 12 SEC Challenge in Lawrence, and Kansas got boat raced by Kentucky. Kentucky, the only road team to win in the challenge. And then I saw the Chiefs-Bengals game. Spent way too much money on tickets, and the Chiefs blew a 21-3 lead somehow, some way, and they got bounced too. So maybe I just won't go to any UT games for a while because I'm clearly bad luck. I got some bad juju right now, Joe.
Oscar Tshiebwe still haunting all your teams, isn't he?
They're good. Kentucky's good. We talk about Texas not having a lot of athleticism. Kentucky does not have that problem. They've got some dudes for John Calipari. So yeah, they're a legit threat to make a run, no doubt.
All right. Talk hoops, talk football. Anything else we need to hit?
I think that's it, man. Good stuff. Appreciate all of y'all listening. Appreciate the continued love and support of the One and O podcast. And please rate and subscribe and review this pod wherever you get your podcast. Shout out to those watching on YouTube right now. And quick shout out to our sponsors, Audiovisual Consultations and Altstat Beer. Make sure you follow Joe on Twitter at JosephCook89. Check out the great work he does over at InsideTexas.com. Make sure you subscribe over there if you haven't done that yet. The best UT coverage you can find, football, basketball, baseball, whatever. They got you covered at IT. You can follow me on Twitter at Brad Kellner and listen to The Wheelhouse every weekday from 3 to 7 p.m. on ESPN 97.5 in Houston. You can listen online at ESPN975.com. For Joe Cook, I am BK Brad Kellner. Until next time, y'all stay safe, y'all stay healthy, and hook 'em.